In the endless night of the Imperium, survival is not a right but a fragile privilege within the colossal hive cities. Billions of souls are pressed into spires that claw at the clouds and into underhives that drown in darkness. Life here is stripped down to its rawest struggle. The streets drip with damp rot. The air is thick with mold, smoke, and fumes. Voices of hawkers bounce through crowded tunnels, echoing across markets that never sleep. The market is the heartbeat of the city. In its choking alleys, everything is for sale: official goods, black market contraband, even whispers of forbidden creeds. But for the countless poor, one hunger overrides all others: food. They claw for nutrient paste, gnaw through recycled protein blocks, and barter for anything that can pass as meat. Hunger dictates their lives. And so, when a stall dares to promise fresh pork at a cheap price, it is more than a bargain. It is a miracle of survival. At the center of this chaos stands a slaughterhouse. Its iron doors groan open every morning, spilling out workers drenched in sweat and blood. Inside, pigs swing from rusted hooks, knives rise and fall with mechanical rhythm, and crimson rivulets snake across tiled floors. To the casual eye, nothing seems unusual. Just another abattoir in a city that consumes itself to endure another day. But behind those steel doors lies a truth more horrifying than any nightmare. The Imperium is a realm where myth is kinder than fact. Here, starvation erases every barrier. In the shadows, the line between livestock and human flesh, between butcher and murderer, dissolves without trace. The cries that echo are not always swine. The shapes that dangle from hooks are not always beasts. The citizens do not ask questions. They accept what is placed before them. What they believe to be pork is often something else entirely. Another mask for survival. A crimson curtain pulled tight to hide silenced screams, stifled sobs, and the quiet vanishing of neighbors who will never be seen again. This is no rumor, no idle tale told in hushed voices. This is the truth of the Imperium, a truth that waits inside the slaughterhouse, hidden in plain sight, ready to be carved and sold by the pound. The Hive City is not a place built for human life, but for human survival. Imagine a mountain of stone and steel that rises so high it pierces the clouds, while its foundations sink deep into the earth until they vanish in lightless caverns. Within this colossus live billions of souls, each one struggling to claim a fraction of space, a scrap of food, a breath of air. There is no comfort here, only existence. In the upper spires, the wealthy live under guarded domes, breathing filtered air and consuming imported luxuries. But the higher one climbs, the fewer the people. Real life, the true weight of the city, crushes downward into the endless layers of the underhive here. Darkness reigns. Tunnels choke with mold and sewage. Lights flicker, often broken for decades. The stench of rot and smoke never fades. This is where most of the population is born, struggles, and dies, without ever seeing the sun. Food is scarce, always scarce. For billions of starving citizens, hunger is the only constant companion. Official rations are little more than nutrient paste, gray and tasteless, produced in massive vats that recycle whatever organic matter is available. Protein blocks, manufactured from waste, corpses of vermin, and whatever scraps can be processed, are stamped and sold to the desperate as sustainable nutrition. To the starving, these blocks are a lifeline. To the fortunate, they are a symbol of misery. Markets spring up in every corridor and cavern where people gather. They are places of noise and barter, places where legality matters less than survival. Stalls offer fungus grown in sewage pits, rat meat roasted over chemical fires, or counterfeit amasec poured into cracked bottles. And in the deeper corners where arbits dare not patrol, the true black markets thrive. Here one may purchase contraband relics, forbidden texts, or substances that promise oblivion. But always, food is the center of trade. The hunger of a hive city is endless. It devours everything. The poor fight for scraps. The gangs fight for territory. Merchants fight for influence. And through it all, the people eat what they must to live one more day. Among the noise of the market, one stall has earned a reputation: the pork butcher. His meat is displayed more boldly than any other. Strips of red flesh hang in rows. Fat gleams in the dim light. His prices are lower than those of his rivals, and the cuts appear fresher. For the people of the underhive, this stall is both miracle and mystery. Rumors spread, as they always do. Some say the butcher has connections to the guilds above, smuggling pigs into the hive. Others whisper of trade with off-worlders who supply animals no citizen has seen in generations. But no one questions too deeply. In the hive, questions are dangerous. Answers are worse. The thinnest child and the most broken worker line up together, clutching what few coins they possess for a piece of this miracle. The pork butcher does not ask names. He does not care. He cuts, he weighs, he sells. Behind his iron doors, the work continues day and night, supplying the market with its most desired treasure, meat that looks real. In the words of the coldest truth, in the shadows of the Imperium, no one cares where a meal comes from, as long as it buys them one more day alive. The slaughterhouse behind the butcher's stall is a place most citizens never see. Few dare to ask what lies within. Its walls are thick, its doors always locked, and its workers speak little. Yet the smoke that rises from its chimneys never ceases, and the smell of burning fat drifts across the district, clinging to every surface. Inside, the work is relentless. Hooks sway gently from rusted rails. Chains groan under the weight of carcasses. Knives flash in dim light, their rhythm steady as heartbeats. Buckets fill with blood that is shoveled into drains, then washed down into the depths where no light exists. To any outsider, the scene would be familiar. A slaughterhouse doing its grim duty, but here the details do not add up. The meat supply is too constant, too steady. In a hive where starvation rules every street, how does one man provide so much? Animals are rare, almost mythical. Livestock requires space, feed, and care, luxuries unimaginable in the suffocating dark of the underhive. Yet the butcher's hooks never run empty. His stall never closes for want of product. There are whispers among the workers. Some say the pigs brought in at night do not squeal like pigs, that the cries are too sharp to human. Others claim to see tattoos on the limbs hung from the hooks, markings not found on swine. But when questioned, the workers fall silent. Fear seals their mouths tighter than any oath. In the hive, survival means silence. The Arbites, the enforcers of the Imperium's law, rarely bother with such matters. For them, the butcher is a minor concern compared to uprisings, heresy, or smuggling that threatens tithes. As long as the streets remain quiet and the quotas flow upward, the cries from behind iron doors are ignored. For the Imperium, order outweighs mercy, and so the market thrives. Families carry home their bundles of red meat, never daring to wander too deeply. Children chew strips of flesh, grease running down their faces. Their hunger silenced for a few hours. Workers return to their shifts in the manufactoria, their bellies heavy with food they cannot name. Life goes on, as it always does in the hive, built upon a foundation of silence and complicity. Yet beneath this silence lies a truth as sharp as the butcher as cleaver. The hive consumes its own. The desperation of billions has reduced morality to ash. Cannibalism is not a crime, here it is an unspoken necessity. The butcher is not unique. He is only the most visible. In hidden chambers across the hive, similar practices unfold. Gangs slaughter captives to feed their members. Desperate families carve the flesh of their dead rather than surrender them to the corpse. Manufactoria workers vanish, and their bodies reappear in the stalls of the black market. All of it disguised, all of it tolerated, because hunger devours conscience before it devours flesh. The slaughterhouse is only the mask, the visible edge of an ocean of horror. For those with eyes to see, the truth is clear. In the underhive, the boundary between human and livestock no longer exists. Still, the people remain silent. To question is to vanish. To protest is to be dragged behind those iron doors. Better to eat in silence than to starve in defiance. The hive delivers its lesson with cruel precision. Survival is the only law, and thus the butcher's stall stands as both salvation and damnation. Salvation for those who hunger, damnation for those who understand. A symbol of the Imperium's darkest truth, that its cities endure not through faith, not through law, but through a hunger that consumes even its own people. The slaughterhouse does not advertise itself. It does not need to. Everyone in the district knows where it is, and everyone understands what it provides. Yet no one speaks of what happens within. Its walls rise like a fortress, built from riveted plates of corroded iron, streaked with soot and old blood. A dull crimson glow leaks from the slats in the roof, painting the alleyways with a faint reminder of what lies beyond. Inside, the air is thick with steam and the copper stench of blood. The floors are slick, washed daily yet never clean, the stone permanently stained with a brownish hue. Hooks sway above the workers' heads, each bearing its cargo of flesh. The hum of machinery echoes through the chambers, saws grinding, chains rattling, cleavers striking bone with rhythmic inevitability. To the casual eye, this is nothing more than a place of butchery. Carcasses hang in long rows, their bodies stripped and prepared for the market stalls. Workers in aprons streaked with gore wield their knives with mechanical precision. Buckets filled with awful sluices carry away the waste, and the whole system runs like a grim machine. But look closer, and the cracks begin to show. The animals are too few. The pigs are emaciated, their numbers dwindling week by week. Shipments from above Hive farms have slowed to a trickle, barely enough to justify the endless piles of meat leaving the slaughterhouse each morning. The math does not work. The supply is impossible. And yet, the hooks never hang empty. A rumor drifts through the workers. They whisper of nights when the gates open to receive shipments that make no sound of hooves or squeals. They whisper of cages shrouded in cloth, carried by men who refuse to meet anyone's eyes. They whisper of cries that echo in the dark, cries too human to be dismissed. Those whispers die quickly. In the Hive, rumors are as dangerous as weapons. To repeat them is to risk being added to the slaughter, and so, the workers bend their heads and keep their knives moving. The sounds inside betray the truth to those who listen. The butcher's saw does not always strike swine bone. Sometimes the pitch is different, higher, sharper, the crack of human ribs forced apart. The muffled cries that seep beneath the roar of machinery are not animal. They are desperate, terrified, and unmistakably human. And then there are the sights that cannot be unseen. One worker spoke once, in hushed tones, of a night when a body slipped from its hook. In the dim glow he saw a hand, small and fragile, its fingernails painted with flaking polish. He swore he saw the tattoo of a gang mark on another carcass, quickly covered with cuts to disguise it. He told his story once, and then he vanished the next day. No one ever mentioned him again. A testimony, brief and broken, lingers in the dark. I heard the screams through the vents. They told me it was only the pigs. But pigs don't beg for mercy. Pigs don't cry out for their mothers. I know what I heard. And when I saw that hand, I knew it was no animal. It was one of us. Such stories are rare, whispered only in corners, spoken only once. The butcher's stall in the market thrives because people choose ignorance. It is easier to believe in the lie of endless pigs than to confront the truth of what is hanging on the hooks. Every Hive citizen understands the bargain. Ask no questions, eat what is given, survive another day. Those who break the bargain vanish into the shadows, swallowed by the iron doors of the slaughterhouse. And the slaughterhouse itself does not stop. Its machines grind on, its hooks sway endlessly, its workers carve flesh into neat parcels for the market. Outside, families queue to buy their share, their hunger too strong to allow suspicion. They leave with their bundles wrapped in waxed paper, never realizing that within those folds lies the body of their neighbors, their friends, perhaps even their kin. But whispers only tell part of the story. Beyond the iron gates, past the first halls, lies a truth too raw to be spoken aloud. The deeper one walks into the slaughterhouse, the more the illusion begins to rot. The outer chambers may still resemble a place of honest butchery, but beyond them the truth stands naked. The lighting grows dim, tinted red as if the very lamps are drenched in blood. The walls close in, their surfaces streaked with years of gore that no amount of washing could erase. The smell is unbearable, a mixture of sweat, decay, and hot iron that clings to the throat and suffocates the lungs. Here, the workers labor in silence. Their faces are masked, their eyes downcast. They are not butchers by choice. Most are debt slaves, indentured to the guild, condemned to carve until their hands no longer obey. Their movements are mechanical, their silence absolute, for to speak is to invite attention. And attention here is deadly. The sounds dominate everything. The shriek of circular saws tearing through bone, the wet slap of flesh thrown onto tables, the hiss of steam cleaning blood from tools. And, beneath it all, the faint cries half-choked, cut short, yet unmistakably human. The workers pretend not to hear. To acknowledge the sound is to admit knowledge, and knowledge here is fatal. Occasionally, a sound pierces too sharp to be ignored, a scream abruptly silenced, a plea for mercy drowned beneath the grind of steel. The workers' hands tremble for a moment, but then the rhythm of knives resumes. Survival requires obedience. The victims are many, their sources varied. Some are drawn from the endless tide of the underhive poor, plucked from alleys where no one will notice their absence. Others are criminals seized by gangs, sold to the guild in exchange for protection or coin. Rumors persist of children vanishing from orphan hablocks, their small bodies never seen again. In the Hive, every life is expendable, every corpse a commodity. The process is efficient. Victims are stripped, their hair shaved, their features obscured. The flesh is carved with practiced precision, trimmed to erase human resemblance. Offal is discarded into vats, bones are crushed for fertilizer, and what remains is wrapped and labeled as pork. It is an industry of deception, perfected through repetition. Witnesses who stumble upon this truth rarely survive. One testimony survives only because it was scrawled on a wall before its author vanished. I saw them cutting the bodies. They peeled the skin, shaped the limbs, and hung them on hooks like pigs. I wanted to scream, but the smell of blood choked me. They laughed as they worked, not like men, but like machines. I knew then that this hive is built on more than stone and steel. It is built on our flesh. For those who serve inside, the horror becomes routine. At first, the workers gag at the sight of familiar faces turned into meat. Over time, revulsion dulls into numbness. Hands move without thought, knives cut without hesitation, and the line of carcasses continues. To live, they must forget what they see. The guild profits endlessly. Each parcel of meat sold in the markets fuels their power. Each coin exchanged buys silence from officials who prefer ignorance over truth. Even the Arbites look away, dismissing whispers as superstition. For to expose the slaughterhouse would be to admit that the hive itself is rotting. The system depends on denial, and still the hooks sway, heavy with their burden. The slaughterhouse does not rest. Day and night its furnaces burn, its machines grind, its drains run red. Outside, the smoke stains the sky, a signal too obvious to ignore, yet ignored all the same. Hunger blinds the people, fear chains them. Better to eat and forget than to face the nightmare. The hive accepts the slaughterhouse because it must. It is both crime and necessity, abomination and salvation. In a city of billions, morality is a luxury none can afford, and so the slaughter continues, hidden in plain sight, feeding the hive with its own flesh. The doors remain shut, the cries muffled, the truth unspoken, but the truth does not vanish. It waits behind the iron gates, in the red-lit halls, in the rhythm of knives and saws. And for those who hear, for those who see, the knowledge is worse than death. For in the hive, ignorance is survival, and survival is the only law. The slaughterhouse is not sustained by pigs. That illusion dies the moment one peers too closely at the hooks and tables. What hangs there is not livestock, it is humanity itself. The truth is whispered in the underhive. The missing are not missing at all. They are processed, packaged, consumed, every day. Citizens vanish from habblocks, manufactoria lines, and market alleys. To outsiders, they are merely lost to the chaos of the hive. But those who know understand where their bodies go. The slaughterhouse never lacks supply, because its supply is the people themselves. The victims come from the lowest tiers where life is cheapest. Beggars, addicts, and vagrants disappear without notice. Gang disputes end with corpses sold instead of discarded. Orphanages surrender their wards to inspectors who never return with them. Even petty criminals are quietly delivered as payment to the guild, their sentences carried out not by Arbites but by knives and hooks. In this economy of despair, every life holds a price, and that price is flesh. The process is deliberate. The guild has perfected the art of concealment. Limbs are reshaped, torsos carved, faces mutilated, until no trace of humanity remains. Flesh is trimmed to resemble cuts of swine, bones rearranged or shattered to mimic porcine frames. Some workers sew patches of hide, stitching grotesque disguises so that the end product resembles what the market expects. The deception is grotesque, but it is effective, and the people, desperate and starving, never question it. Hunger overwhelms suspicion. Wrapped in waxed paper, labeled with crude stamps, the flesh passes easily for pork. No one dares ask why it is always available, why it tastes subtly different, why the supply never fails when every farm above runs dry. A fragment of testimony from a worker survives, carved into the underside of a table before he vanished. They told me to cut away the face. They said no one must see. I did as I was told, but as the blade moved, I recognized the scar on the cheek. It was my brother. They laughed at me for hesitating. They said the hive eats all of us sooner or later. Such moments expose the nightmare that feeds the hive. It is not merely survival. It is a system of consumption, where human flesh becomes commodity, where the line between butcher and victim blurs until it disappears entirely. The guild profits not only from selling meat. Heretic allies strip the bodies further, extracting organs for black market cosmetics and forbidden experiments. Hearts, lungs, and eyes are siphoned away, leaving only remnants for the hooks. What cannot be sold whole is ground, mixed, and disguised in vats of processed slurry. Nothing is wasted. Not even death is spared the ledger. This is the essence of the hive. Every life reduced to utility, every death monetized. The system does not care for morality, it cares only for function. And so the slaughterhouse thrives, not as an anomaly, but as a perfect expression of the Imperium's creed. Life is fuel, Flesh is resource. The hive devours itself so that it may endure another day. Outside, the markets continue. Families share meals of red meat. Mothers feed their children with broth boiled from bones, and workers chew strips of salted flesh to endure endless shifts. All of them consume the hive itself, without realizing it. They consume their neighbors, their kin, the nameless billions reduced to meat, and the truth remains hidden, not because it is unknowable, but because no one dares to face it. Hunger makes cowards of them all. Ignorance becomes survival, and survival is the only law. The slaughterhouse is not unique. It is only one among many, scattered across the endless hive, each one a silent engine of horror, feeding the city with its own people. Each one proof that the Imperium endures not through faith or glory, but through cannibalism disguised as commerce. The people eat, and they do not ask. The butchers carve, and they do not pause. The hive breathes, and it does not care. There is no single type of victim. The slaughterhouse accepts all. The poor are the easiest to take. They vanish by the dozens, their absence unnoticed in the chaos of hablocks where overcrowding is suffocating. No record, no outcry, no justice. The hive swallows them without hesitation. Criminals follow. Their lives forfeit not to the Arbites but to profit. Gangs trade them for coin, their bodies worth more in death than in life. Sometimes entire cells are rounded up and sold wholesale, their tattoos and scars still visible as the knives carve them apart. Children are not spared. In the darkest whispers it is said that young flesh is prized for its tenderness. Orphanages lose wards overnight. Inspectors collect names that never return. The children reappear only as indistinguishable cuts of meat, their identities erased with the stroke of a cleaver. Even the loyal are consumed. Debt slaves who falter, workers who collapse on the manufactoria floor. The sick who cannot meet their quotas all find themselves redirected toward the slaughterhouse, to the hive. They are not citizens but resources. Their bodies feed the living when their labor fails. A survivor once spoke, though his words were brief, delivered in trembling gasps before Arbit silenced him. I saw them hang her up. They cut her open, and I knew her face even when they tried to ruin it. It was my daughter. They told me to eat, to swallow, to live, but I could not. I vomited her out, and for that they dragged me into the dark. The testimony ends there. His fate requires no imagination. The practice is not merely tolerated, it is sustained. Black market cartels profit from the trade, supplying the guild with steady streams of bodies. Heretic surgeons pay richly for the organs, their experiments funded by the suffering of the hive. Even officials are complicit, bribed to look away, their silence purchased with the very meat they pretend not to recognize. And the citizens, trapped in their hunger, perpetuate the cycle. They purchase the flesh, consume it, and return for more. Their guilt is buried beneath the need to survive. They do not want to know, and so they do not ask. This complicity transforms the hive into something more than a city. It becomes a vast organism, devouring itself to continue living. Every level contributes to the consumption. Gangs supplying bodies, workers carving flesh, citizens buying meat, officials ignoring truth. It is not an aberration. It is the system itself. The image of pigs on the hooks is merely the mask. Behind it lies the truth that the hive survives only by cannibalizing its own. The butcher's cleaver is not just a tool, it is a symbol of the Imperium's philosophy. Life is expendable. Death is utility. Flesh is resource. And yet, even as this horror unfolds daily, no revolt rises. Fear suppresses rebellion. Hunger smothers outrage. The people accept the slaughterhouse as they accept the smog, the disease, the endless toil. It is not questioned because it cannot be questioned. To resist is to vanish. To deny is to live. The hive itself seems to conspire in the silence. Its towers echo with the hum of industry, drowning out the screams. Its streets are crowded with the desperate, too consumed with survival to notice their neighbor's absence. Its markets bustle, their noise masking the faint cries that seep from the slaughterhouse walls. Though unspoken, the truth is omnipresent. Everyone knows. No one admits. The slaughterhouse feeds them all, and they in turn feed the slaughterhouse. This is not an isolated nightmare. Across the countless hives of the Imperium, the same pattern repeats. Flesh markets, corpse guilds, and hidden butchers thrive in the shadows, ensuring that starvation never slows the engines of the Imperium. Billions live only because billions more are consumed. The truth of the meat is not merely horror, it is doctrine. It is survival stripped of all illusion, survival reduced to its rawest form. The hive devours itself because it must, and in the Imperium, must is law. Though the slaughterhouse concealed its horrors behind locked doors, the city could not remain untouched. The people of the Hive consumed its products every day. The meat was cheap, plentiful, and most importantly, red. In a place where hunger carved through bone like acid, the appearance of abundance was enough. We cared to ask questions. Fewer still dared to voice them. The first signs of rot spread quietly. Families noticed that illness lingered longer than before. Stomachs churned after meals. Fevers burned hotter, and whispers spread that the food was somehow wrong. Yet desperation silenced these doubts. A full belly, however poisoned, was better than the slow agony of starvation. The Hive, in its cruel arithmetic, forced the people to choose between sickness and hunger. They chose to eat. Still, there were those who could not shake the unease. A merchant's wife swore that the bones in her stew were too fine, too human in shape. A gang enforcer laughed bitterly as he chewed through a strip of meat, claiming it tasted too familiar. Rumors grew that the missing, the criminals, and the nameless poor had not disappeared into the night at all but had returned in another form, steaming in the bowls of their neighbors, a witness recalled. I once bought a cut from the market. It smelled rich, fresher than anything I'd seen in months. But as I tore into it, I found a piece of gristle with a scar burned into the flesh. I knew that scar. My brother had carried it on his shoulder since childhood. In that moment, I tasted his absence on my tongue. The revelation shattered some, but for many it simply confirmed what they already suspected. The Hive had long conditioned its people to swallow not just food, but truths too bitter to voice. Survival demanded complicity. To eat was to live, and to live was to remain silent. Yet silence carried a cost. Paranoia took root in the cracks of the Hive. Families looked upon their meals with dread, fearing the face that once belonged to the flesh now simmering in their pots. Children asked what kind of animal had bones shaped like fingers. Parents hushed them quickly, but the questions lingered in their eyes. Some went mad. Others adapted. A handful embraced the horror, turning it into ritual. Cannibal cults sprouted in the underhive like fungi in damp stone. They claimed the flesh was a gift, a form of communion with powers greater than the Imperium. Where others saw desperation, these cults saw revelation. To them, eating the flesh of man was no longer an accident, it was worship. They painted sigils in blood, chanting that every meal was an offering, every bite a sacrament. For the rest of the Hive, the boundary between human and animal dissolved into a gray blur. The market stalls still overflowed with crimson cuts, and still the crowds gathered to purchase them. Hunger drowned morality. In the shadows, the truth grew louder, but so did the gnawing in their stomachs. The slaughterhouse had become both executioner and provider, a grotesque circle of necessity. Every meal carried its own silent accusation, yet no one dared refuse. To abstain from eating was to embrace death. To partake was to share in the city's collective sin. Each bite reminded the people that they were not merely victims of hunger, but participants in a ritual of erasure devouring the very fabric of their own community. A factory worker whispered, "I used to wonder where my neighbors had gone. Then one night, my supper answered me. The marrow and the bone was soft, and I knew no beast carried such a skeleton. Since then, I eat with my eyes closed. It's easier that way." This quiet complicity infected the Hive like a plague. The abites could police gangs. The ecclesiarchy could burn heretics, but no authority could extinguish hunger. Hunger was the true governor of the Hive, dictating obedience more effectively than any decree from Terra. The slaughterhouse did not need guards to enforce its silence. The empty stomachs of billions were its enforcers. Disease soon followed. Strange fevers swept through the hablocks, as if the very flesh carried curses within it. Some said the meat was tainted by the warp, that chaos whispered through every cut and every stew. Doctors spoke of contamination and parasites, but their voices were drowned by the cries of the starving. The line between biology and damnation blurred in the dim corridors of the Hive. Yet the markets thrived. Stalls overflowed with cuts hacked into crude shapes, enough to disguise their origin at a glance. Sellers shouted, blades dripped, and the crowd surged forward with coins in their fists. The exchange was simple. Coin for flesh, silence for survival. No one asked whose ribs those were, whose heart floated in the broth, whose life had been rendered into sustenance. And in the shadows, the cannibal cults grew bolder. They feasted not in secrecy, but in spectacle. Processions marched through the underhive chanting hymns to the dark gods, gnawing on charred bones as offerings. What had begun as survival twisted into belief, and belief into worship. For them, the Hive itself was an altar, every mouth a chalice, every meal a mass. For those who resisted, life was no kinder. Those who refused to eat withered away, their deaths unnoticed, their sacrifices forgotten. The hive did not honor abstinence, it consumed them too, burying their absence beneath the noise and stink of survival. The nightmare was not simply that the people had eaten their neighbors, the true horror was that they learned to live with it. The hive reshaped their morality until even cannibalism became mundane. A routine as ordinary as buying bread or lighting a lumen lamp. In this crucible, humanity itself was rendered down like meat on the butcher's block, stripped of dignity, stripped of taboo, until nothing remained but hunger. Though unspoken, the truth lingered in every glance, every shared meal, every empty place at the table. Everyone knew, no one admitted. The slaughterhouse fed them all, and they in turn fed the slaughterhouse. Whispers became impossible to ignore. Too many had vanished, too many bones carried the wrong shape. The rumors, once buried beneath silence, began to reach ears that could not afford to remain deaf. The Adeptus Arbeitskeepers of Imperial law received the first report, though no citizen dared bring it openly. Instead, it arrived as an anonymous slip of parchment, smeared with grease and fear. At first, the Arbeits dismissed it as heresy or sedition. Hive cities thrived on rumor. To chase every whisper was to drown in madness. Yet disappearances continued, and the smell of rot thickened in the markets. When even mid-level guilders began to complain that their servants had not returned, the Arbeits stirred. For the Imperium, it was not compassion that demanded action, but order. Too much unrest, too much chaos, risked fracture, and fracture could not be tolerated. Behind closed doors, judges in black robes weighed the evidence. Their deliberations were cold, couched in the language of quotas, productivity, and stability. The hive could endure misery, but not revolt. If whispers turned into open dissent, if hunger bred rebellion, the balance of imperial rule would falter. The parchment report became a file, the file became a docket, and at last the Arbeits' machinery of retribution rumbled to life. The Arbeits' raid began at dawn, though dawn was only a concept in the hive. Sirens blared through the smag-choked streets, vox amplifiers barking proclamations of imperial authority. Shock troopers in black carapace armor stormed the market, their mauls crackling with power. The sellers screamed as their stalls were overturned, slabs of red flesh tumbling into the grime. The crowd scattered like vermin before flame. Behind the iron doors of the slaughterhouse, the truth revealed itself in grotesque silence. Rows of hooks lined the ceiling, heavy with bodies. Some were pigs, yes, but far too many were not. Pale limbs swung limply in the stagnant air. Human torsos were flayed and reassembled to mimic livestock sutured in crude parody of butchery. Piles of bones lay stacked in corners, skulls grinning with hollow accusation. A witness later testified, "They broke the doors open and the smell hit us first. Then I saw them, rows of bodies strung up like meat." The Arbeits didn't speak. They didn't need to. Every eye knew what it was, and in that silence, I felt the hive itself shudder. The Arbeits catalogued what they could, though the volume defied comprehension. Ledgers written in blood tallied names beside weights of flesh. Tools lay discarded. Bone saws, cleavers, hooks black with age. In the center of the floor, a trough overflowed with organs, discarded as waste or stockpiled for darker purposes. Veterans of dozens of raids, men who had executed rebels without blinking, now turned pale as they wrote their reports. News spread faster than any sanction could contain. Families pressed into the streets demanding answers, demanding faces among the corpses. Some found them, others did not, and some realized, with a terror that broke the soul, that they had already consumed those they searched for. Murmurs became wails, wails became riots, and the Arbeits struggled to keep the crowds from tearing the markets apart themselves. The Arbeits' presence alone could not contain the tide. Fear had become a plague, and in that vacuum of certainty, the ecclesiarchy advanced. Their priests came draped in crimson robes, censers swinging as fire and incense filled the air. Where the Arbeits sought order, the ecclesiarchy sought purification. To them, the slaughterhouse was not merely a crime, it was heresy. Chants rose above the screams as flamers ignited, purging stalls and hablocks alike. The smell of charred flesh mingled with the rot, a second wave of horror blanketing the streets. Crowds wailed as fires consumed not only the slaughterhouse but everything touched by its trade. Merchants who had sold the meat were dragged into the open, their tongues nailed to planks before the emperor's hymns drowned their pleas. One Arbeits officer, hardened by decades of brutality, later confessed in private. "We found piles of bones taller than a man, skulls cracked open like eggshells, children's faces staring from heaps of ash. I've seen war zones, exterminations, purges, but this was different. This was the Hive feeding on itself. For the people, revelation was worse than silence. Mothers collapsed as they recognized trinkets or scraps of clothing among the corpses. Fathers clawed at the barricades, demanding the return of what could no longer be returned. And above it all, the ecclesiarchy's hymns thundered, declaring that only fire could cleanse such sin. Executions followed swiftly. The butchers were dragged into the streets, lined up before walls scorched with soot. The Arbites fired volleys without ceremony, bodies crumpling into the same mud they had once stained with blood. The priests proclaimed absolution, but none was felt. For every butcher slain, 1,000 citizens remained who had eaten their wares. No bullet, no flame, could erase that truth. The purge became a spectacle. Priests raised their voices until they were hoarse, promising that the emperor's light had banished corruption. Yet behind their eyes flickered calculation, for such horror could rally faith as well as break it. Processions marched through the Hive, relics lifted high, while terrified citizens bowed not from devotion but from fear. The abbots posted curfews, the ecclesiarchy organized vigils, and both proclaimed victory. But the stench lingered, and with it, doubt. When the fires finally gutted out, the Hive lay silent. The markets were reduced to ash, the slaughterhouse to rubble, yet the hunger remained. Thousands had eaten what should never have been consumed, and nothing could unmake that act. Families sat at tables staring at their bowls, wondering what truly filled them. Neighbors eyed one another with suspicion, each wondering whose kin had been swallowed by whose pot. The Arbites wrote their reports, the ecclesiarchy proclaimed a victory of faith, and life in the Hive lurched forward. But in every household, at every table, a shadow lingered. For in the Imperium, fire can burn the heretic, and law can punish the criminal, but neither can cleanse the taste of human flesh once it has passed the lips. The slaughterhouse was destroyed, but its legacy endured. For the Hive, it was not a deviation from imperial life, it was a mirror. In the Imperium, human suffering is not a scandal but a resource. The bodies consumed in silence were not an anomaly. They were the logical outcome of a system that values survival above humanity. The Hive understood this instinctively, even if none dared say it aloud. Survival was not sacred, it was transactional. The Arbites could file their reports. The ecclesiarchy could sing their hymns. But none could erase the truth carved into the marrow of the Hive. Man was not sacred, man was meat. The words lingered in whispers, in glances, in the silence that followed meals. To say otherwise was to lie. And in the Hive, lies rarely lasted. The Imperium teaches this lesson everywhere, though the forms vary. On agri-worlds, peasants toil until their backs break, feeding planets they will never see. On forge worlds, lungs blacken and flesh rots in service to machines older than memory. In the Hive, hunger became the executioner. The mechanism is different, but the truth is constant. The individual exists only to sustain the greater mass. A single life matters only as long as it can be squeezed, drained, or burned for output. Beyond that, nothing remains but ash. This is why the slaughterhouse did not shock the highest authorities. They burned it, yes. They punished the guilty, yes. But they did not mourn. To mourn would imply value in the lives lost, and in the Imperium, value is measured only by utility. Those who fed the Hive had served their purpose, whether as workers, criminals, or flesh. In the end, they were no different from ammunition expended in battle or fuel consumed in a reactor. The loss was not tragedy, it was accounting. The Grimdark reality is not that cannibalism happened. The Grimdark reality is that it could happen anywhere, at any time, and nothing in the Imperium would truly prevent it. Hive cities are endless labyrinths of need. When food dwindles, when law falters, when desperation sharpens into hunger, the line between livestock and citizen vanishes like smoke. 1 week's worker is the next week's ration. It is not a matter of morality, but of logistics. A preacher once declared, "The emperor protects," yet in the Hive it was not faith that filled bellies, it was not prayer that kept children alive. It was flesh, and when faith competes with flesh, flesh wins. The sermon hall still rang with promises of salvation, but those promises echoed hollow against the sound of knives on bone. In the darkness of the Hive, protection was not divine, it was edible. Thus, the slaughterhouse was not merely a crime scene, it was a parable. It taught the people that their lives could be weighed, butchered, and sold without consequence. It taught the Arbites that order mattered more than justice. It taught the ecclesiarchy that purification was only spectacle, and it taught the Hive that survival is the only law. Every faction, every institution, found in its smoke-stained walls a reflection of its own creed. And none could deny the lesson, for it was written in blood. What burned was only the structure, what endured was the lesson. The slaughterhouse reminded the hive of a truth the Imperium has whispered for millennia. There are no innocents, only the useful and the spent. The ashes became a monument, invisible yet eternal, a testament that flesh could be coined and life could be weighed on scales without guilt. The tragedy lay not in the discovery, but in the inevitability. Hive cities are machines built to consume lives. They devour generation after generation, grinding flesh into labor, labor into production, and production into survival. Whether that consumption is economic, spiritual, or literal makes little difference. The outcome is the same. The hive feeds. The people are fed upon. To resist this truth is madness. To accept it is despair. To outside observers, the revelation might seem monstrous, a sign of decay or corruption. To the Imperium, it was Tuesday. Billions die each day across its countless worlds, their lives extinguished with as little thought as the snapping of a twig. What mattered was not the loss, but the maintenance of order. And if order required silence, then silence would be enforced. The death of a billion is tragedy only when it disrupts the quotas. Some whispered that chaos had a hand in the slaughterhouse, that the cults feeding in the shadows were evidence of demonic influence. Perhaps it was true, perhaps it was not. In the Imperium, the line between desperation and heresy is thin, often invisible. To eat to survive was sin enough. Whether or not the dark gods smiled upon it was irrelevant. The people had no need of demons to become monsters. Hunger was sufficient. The ecclesiarchy proclaimed that fire had cleansed the hive, but the people knew better. Fire cannot erase memory. Ash cannot silence hunger. In the days that followed, markets reopened. Different stalls, different sellers, the same gnawing need. And though the meat was once again labeled as swine, few could look upon it without remembering the faces that had swung from the hooks. The very smell of cooking flesh became a kind of curse, a reminder that hunger could transform neighbor into livestock overnight. The slaughterhouse became a legend whispered in corridors, not as warning, but as inevitability. For the hive, and for the Imperium itself, the message was clear. There are no boundaries left. Not between man and animal, not between crime and survival, not between heresy and necessity. There is only the endless grinding of life into death, and death into sustenance. The hive swallowed its own tail, and in doing so, revealed the cycle that bound the galaxy itself. In the end, the slaughterhouse was not unique. It was not an aberration to be erased, but a truth to be recognized. The Imperium does not stumble into such horrors, it manufactures them. Every hive, every forge, every battlefield is another slaughterhouse in disguise, reshaping flesh into the fuel of survival. The disguise varies, but the machine beneath is the same. And so the story ends, not with redemption, not with cleansing. The Imperium does not forgive, for it does not care. Survival is no salvation, it is a sentence. In the hive, the people endured, but endurance was not triumph. It was merely postponement. The fire faded, the markets bustled, the Arbites withdrew, and the ecclesiarchy sang again. But beneath it all, the hive remembered, and memory, like hunger, never dies. The slaughterhouse was never truly about pigs. The hooks, the knives, the walls streaked with blood, these were only veils. Behind them lay the machinery of the hive itself, grinding lives into meat, silencing voices into dust. To look too closely is to see that the slaughterhouse is not a place, but a pattern. The Imperium itself, a machine that feeds on its own citizens without hesitation, without end. What happened in that market is not an anomaly. It is not a cautionary legend whispered to frighten children. It is reality, one episode among countless others scattered across the stars. Every hive has its silences. Every world carries its unseen butcher. The Imperium does not conceal them because concealment is unnecessary. People will eat, people will endure, people will forget. Survival erases memory as surely as hunger erases dignity. The Arbites burned the stalls. The ecclesiarchy proclaimed absolution through fire. Ash choked the alleys where once the cries of the market rose, but the fire cleansed nothing. The people still remembered the taste on their tongues. The hive still remembered the bones ground into its gutters. The truth cannot be undone by proclamations or executions. It lingers, heavy, in the breath of every survivor. And what of those survivors? They walked back into the hive, coins still in their fists, stomachs still gnawed by hunger. Tomorrow they will eat again. Perhaps the meat will be clean. Perhaps not. The difference scarcely matters. When starvation rules, choice is an illusion. The hive teaches this lesson with merciless clarity. Survival is not victory, it is servitude. This is the Imperium, grim, unyielding, infinite, a realm that demands obedience. that thrives on silence, that devours the very lives it swears to protect. In such a place, myths are kinder than truth. Legends speak of heroes and saints. Reality speaks of slaughterhouses and markets where humanity is carved thin and sold cheap, and reality always wins, so the story returns to where it began. In the market stalls, among the shouts of sellers and the clang of blades, nothing has changed, nothing ever will. The machine grinds on, and the people grind with it. You may think yourself outside that cycle, a witness untouched, but in the Imperium, no one is untouched. All are consumed in time, and the next time you see a cut of red meat glistening in a hive market, ask yourself, whose flesh sustains you, whose silence purchased your survival, whose absence feeds your life? The answer will never be written, never spoken, but it is there, waiting behind every iron door.